call me, and I, I don't parachute into any community uninvited. As a matter of fact, I don't parachute anymore. I'm an ex-Marine. I don't do that anymore. I take Delta. And I fly in, hit the ground, they drive me around, I see what's happening. But I've seen so many communities that are so impacted. People are sick, and there's no explanation as to why they're sick, other than the fact that in some cases they're drinking poisoned water. There's a case right now I'm working on as an expert witness in Tennessee. This is a case where this county, Dixon County, which is like 4.5% black, it has put all of its landfills, all of its toxic waste dumps in the middle of this one little community. And it brought this company in, and to provide jobs, in the 60s. And this company dumped TCE in the landfill. It leaked and got into wells. And EPA, the federal EPA, and the state Department of Environmental Quality knew about the contamination of these wells, this family's wells, as early as 1988. And they wrote them a letter and said, okay, your well is fine, drink the water. But in 1993, they found TCE in the spring of this white family. And immediately, they told the family, don't drink the water. We'll dig another well. That well got contaminated. We'll put you on city water. And immediately, they put them on city water. But it was only 7 years later that the black family was given the same information and told, don't drink the water, TCE's in the well. And the black family filed a lawsuit. The fact is that everybody in that family has some type of disease, cancer, learning disability, immune deficiencies. If you look at the toxicological profile and the health impacts of TCE, they're all in that family. Now, so the problem is that the government, this is the well that was contaminated, and they put a lock on it. Here's the kicker, and we did a GIS analysis. And not very sophisticated to know that the black family lives 54 feet from the landfill. You don't need ArcView, LandView to figure that out. And what we did is we got all the addresses of all the county commissioners and the city council. And on average, these elected officials live 5.5 miles away, 5.5 miles away as opposed to 54 feet. Two of the county commissioners live 15 miles away. They're making decisions about whether or not this family should receive compensation for the fact that this landfill has poisoned their wells. They did not notify them. They treated the family differently. This is discrimination, and it's also contamination lawsuit in terms of health. Oh, you can see how close it is. I'm standing in the yard of the Hope family, and this is the basketball goal, and this is the landfill. So when you talk about these issues, and you talk about the disparities, and you talk about the dangers, the path of least resistance, this is another case I got to call on. This is January 6, 2005. This is a case where two trains collided in a little town called Graniteville. And we know that when trains collide, that's not good. And what happened is that the first responders in Aiken County, the first responders, mostly white people, mostly white men, fire department, sheriff's department, went and they relocated, evacuated the families that lived, that they knew, mostly white, at it's like 3-something in the morning, 3:39 in the morning. They evacuated the white families. But the fact is, that's a train wreck. The fact is that they left some families behind. And the families that were left behind, these were mostly black families who lived in a little segregated area of the community. And the fact is that some of the respondents said, we didn't know that people lived in those down the little alleys. 13 hours later, this is chlorine plume, just wafts through the area. And so the idea is that some people get left behind for some reason. Is it because they are poor? Is it because they are black? Is it because their community somehow is on the wrong side of the tracks, literally and physically? This is a case that happened after Katrina. I'm going to get to this. This is in January. This is after Katrina. This is Baytown, Texas. ExxonMobil, the world's largest petrochemical company. I'm going to call names because I have tenure. ExxonMobil had a spill, had a leak. And, and it just sent this gas throughout this little public housing project. And the public housing project sits fence line to the community. Mostly African Americans and mostly Latinos that live in the project. They are mostly poor people. So it's mostly poor and mostly people of color. You can see how close it is. It sits on top of the community. The fact is that the company, as soon as the community started calling and complaining, the company came out, wiped the spill up, cleaned it up, planted new grass around the swings and the playgrounds, and to notify the Texas department that deals with the environment 24 hours later. 24 hours later. The people in Harris County Environment, which Harris County is where Baytown is in, they didn't find out about it until 3 days later when they read about it in the Houston Chronicle. So, late. And so, this was after Katrina. This is not isolated. This is the fact that in many cases across the country, public housing sits in close proximity to toxic release inventory facilities, very dangerous facilities. These are poor people who generally do not have a lot of money, they don't have a lot of options, and they don't have a lot of transportation choices. They generally ride the bus. And if you've ever ridden the bus, you know that in some cases, and particularly in emergencies, the buses generally don't run. And so when you talk about explosions, accidents, this is in Port Arthur, Texas. Our schools are not even safe. There are thousands of school children going to school in schools that are adjacent to, contiguous, next to, in the path line and fence line of dangerous facilities. And many of those schools, as I said before, are poor, and students are children of color, and oftentimes the districts don't have a lot of money to air condition or to make them safe. Playgrounds are not safe. I mean, there's a lot of schools, a lot of playgrounds that have equipment and wood that is still treated with chromated copper arsenic. We know arsenic will kill the hell out of a termite. You know, that's what the wood is treated with in a lot of cases. But a lot of kids are putting their hands in their mouths and taking in the arsenic. It has been banned, but there's still a lot of wood that still has not been taken up and new wood put down. And it happens in mostly poor areas where the parks are at the greatest risk. So we talk about polluted parks, whether it's in Norco, Louisiana, and this is a case where a community that was formed right after slavery on the old diamond plantation in the 1860s, and Shell came in there in the 1940s and sat down right on top of the community. There's an excellent book called Diamond that deals with this. This is not trick photography. This is a playground, and in the background you can see the Shell refinery, that everybody in that community has asthma or respiratory illness or some type of health problem. Am I saying that this company is causing asthma? No, I'm not saying that. What I am saying that what's coming out of the smokestack is not health enhancing. It's not making people feel better. And so when we talk about these issues of air pollution, the cost involved, children spending days out of school, they're getting further and further behind, and going to emergency room, these are big costs. And a lot of the costs that are borne, they're borne by people that don't have health insurance or don't have a lot of money to take off work and to spend on trying to get their kids into hospitals and in to see doctors. And so when we talk about this epidemic, it is not just industries, it's also us. And the fact that we're so into our cars, and everybody, you know, we know that driving is a basic right, and in many cases people believe that it's their constitutional right to pollute and to drive a car. Even the gas is $4 a gallon, and it's their, you know, give me liberty. We know that cars give people liberty, access, mobility, but it also provides a disadvantage if you don't have access to alternative transportation. And we saw this in Katrina, and we saw what happened in terms of vulnerable population, and the most vulnerable population being left behind. Poor people, elderly, disabled, sick people, children, people without cars, transit dependent, non-drivers, and homeless people. When you talk about how evacuees were dispersed all over the map, and the fact that in many cases, if you didn't have a car, you were basically left to fend for yourself. You're on your own. And so when we talk about the issue, people being forced to ride out the storm, we know that this was not, the most comprehensive emergency evacuation plan. Most cities, major cities in this country, emergency evacuation plan is still inadequate. They do not plan for people, these special populations. If we had to evacuate Atlanta, for example, we'd be in trouble. Particularly in terms of where would you send 100,000 people if there was a major disaster? How would you take them, where would you put them, 100,000 black people, for example, who don't have cars, who are low income? Which county is going to take them in the suburban county? I can't think of a single county that would say we'd take 100,000. They didn't want 10. We have a Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority, MARTA. It was supposed to be 5 counties. It ended up being 2. The counties that are majority African American. The surrounding counties said we don't want public transit because MARTA, M-A-R-T-A, stands for Moving Africans Rapidly Through Atlanta. They said, you're going to bring all these black people out? We don't want this. And so they decided not to have MARTA. So everybody's stuck in traffic if you have a car. And MARTA does not go where it needs to go. And so when we talk about the whole issue of lack of transportation, vulnerability, pre-existing vulnerabilities, all these things were known. All of the studies show that there was over 100,000 people in New Orleans that didn't have cars, access to automobiles. Knew this in advance. And so when we talk about automobiles flooded, you talk about public transit flooded, this criminal. School buses flooded, criminal. And so when we talk about emergency transportation plan, inadequate. There are some people who say we don't have the complexion for protection. Pre-existing conditions. There were communities in New Orleans that were fighting to get cleaned up and to get relocated before Katrina. Been fighting for the last 10 years to get cleaned up. One community called Agricultural Street Landfill Community. This was a community that was built on top of a landfill that was used to dispose of hurricane debris in 1965 after Hurricane Betsy. They put all this hurricane debris in this landfill, then they built these houses on top of it. 1965, and up until 1984, they built these houses. This community has been fighting to get relocated. And there's a school that was brand new, state-of-the-art school, had to close because it's built on top of this landfill. All this happened before Katrina. A lot of them were HUD houses because they were subsidized by HUD. Elderly housing and middle-income housing. And so if you talk about preconditions, the fact that there are many communities pre-Katrina in New Orleans where lead poisoned children, neighborhoods, in some cases 60% of the children are lead poisoned. 60%. All these studies were done before. And a lot of it comes from paint and housing, but some of it comes from lead in the soil. And so when you talk about the mother of all cleanups, right now there's a big struggle and a big fight in New Orleans with EPA, federal EPA, and the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality saying that some communities were polluted before Katrina, and therefore we don't have to clean them up. So it's safe because it was polluted before Katrina. And we've been saying all along that these neighborhoods need to be cleaned up. There are FEMA blue top roofs being nailed down on housing that's with lead paint. So they'll put roofs on houses, but they won't clean up the lead. That's like putting a Band-Aid on a cancer. So when we talk about these issues, this toxic soup, and the whole issue of people going back to dress their homes, going back to deal with the debris, and dealing with the flooding, dealing with the fact that mold has taken over many communities, houses, and people are going back without proper equipment, proper training. They're getting sick. Mold is very dangerous. There are people going back in these molded houses without respirators, without gloves, without boots, without Tyvek suits, and they're getting sick. And there's a disease called Katrina cough because breathing these mold spores. This is a friend of mine, close friend of mine's house in New Orleans East, Dr. Beverly Wright. We've written a whole lot together.